make sure. Okay, so good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for joining us on this session on the SSC Shelter Severity Classification. This is the second session of the series of sessions that we started last week. On Tuesday last week, we had the first webinar in which we have provided some introduction, theoretical background on how to be the SSC can be implemented. For today's session, we'll focus more on the analysis and some products that we have developed to accompany the SSC framework to be used in the field. And next week, we will have, during the coordination workshop, we will have another session in which we will run a few scenarios, or we will discuss a few scenarios as we learned from the countries based on the frequently asked questions that we have received. So just again, this disclaimer, we are using the maps and the admin areas of Somalia, but the data we are showing is randomly generated, is not related to any of the severity or people in need in Somalia, and cannot be quoted in any of any product or any further communication beyond this training purpose. So just to make sure that we are all clear on this spot. And then we can, I think we can start now with a recap on the previous session with Neil. Please, Neil.
Great. Can you hear me? Yep, good. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining again. I guess we don't want to be reiterating too much information, but we did want to just sort of do a quick recap over what we've covered over the previous webinars and the training session that we did last week. I will say, just to go over it one more time, but about the point of this tool, just to make sure that we're all on the same page and allow for any comment on it, is that this tool is intended to help us standardize or at least systematize the definition of what we call shelter needs in a humanitarian response. This tool is fundamentally about providing us a people in need number for how many people need shelter, and to what degree, a qualitative degree of what that need looks like, and according to the three pillars that we talked about. So we'll be going over. Well, we've already covered the methodology of how to acquire the data, and now we're going to be going into how we analyze it and how we demonstrate what that need looks like. So that's where we're at. Along our journey here, we're also recognizing that there's a lot of questions that are coming out. We've got here, we've listed a few of the key questions that emerged out of the last training session. And these are all very good questions. And many of them raise questions about how we will use the tool in various contexts and how the tool intersects with other initiatives and other stakeholders in our work. These specific questions I think many of the answers are going to be coming out particularly today, but if not today, they'll be coming out in the workshop at the shelter cluster meetings. The last thing I'll say is that this is still seen as a beginning to what will be a longer process of developing this. Oh, somebody is unmuted. We do encourage this to be tested and evolved and contributed to by the all of you who are part of this meeting, but also in the future, that we know that this is not going to be in a perfect state. It probably never will be, but we want to see it improve and evolve and adapt to the questions that you have. So please bring your questions, please test it, and give us the feedback that we require in order to make it suit your purposes. This is about, suiting the field level needs. All right. Any questions before I hand back over to Hussein? Sounds good.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you, Neil. We'll carry on now with the next slides, next part of the session. I will hand over to Camila, but just before that, we have 1 hour and a half session, but the presentation won't take that long, so we will have plenty of time for discussions. So please bear with us until we finish the presentation, and then we will open the floor for questions and discussions as needed. Thank you. Over to you, Camila.
Thank you, Hussein, and hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Yes. Okay, perfect. Okay, so to set the scene again of where we're at in terms of the training in the implementation of the SSC, last week we discussed how to identify information needs that will help you then apply the SSC. We discussed a little bit the data collection, the different types of data that can be collected, particularly the MSNA, but also what happens when you don't have an MSNA. And then we started discussing how to roll out the SSC analysis. So the SSC analysis itself has different components to it. What we focused on last week was to present you the methodology to go about in calculating the preliminary PIN and the severity. So how to take the data that has been collected through the MSNA or other data collections, and then following the framework and the three-pillar concept, how to generate an estimated number of people in need and the severity of the different areas that you're analyzing in your context. But the analysis doesn't stop there. What you might be faced with is the need to make some adjustments to the PIN and the severity and the PIN as relevant. We'll discuss this today. And then once you've done that, you need to do all of the analysis around it. So understanding, placing the PIN and the severity in the context, which means having a solid understanding of the context itself, an analysis of what might be driving the PIN and the severity, what are the vulnerabilities, what are the possible impacts of unmet shelter needs, and so on. So we'll also have a look at this today. So that's what the analysis, the SSC analysis covers. In terms of how you do it, so last week we went through the tool that exists for you to do the calculation of the PIN and severity. So what we call the calculation tool and the different components to it. So the questionnaire itself, the analysis grid, the decision tree, and so on. The ones that we'll be presenting to you today are the evidence list and the analysis workshop. And we'll also make some references to various intercluster discussions that may be ongoing at the same time as you're running your SSC analysis. And then finally, we'll also go over the final product, the shelter needs overview, what it contains and how you can use it for different purposes. Okay, so let's start with the evidence list. In a nutshell, the evidence list is, well, it's in the name, but it's a list of all the data sources and secondary information that you can refer to for any of the parts of the SSC analysis, in addition to the primary household level data. So this might include other data sets through an Excel format, but it goes way beyond that. It might be referring to reports that are conducted by the government, by development actors, by specific NGOs on very specific areas. It might be information from SITREPs from OCHA. It might be reports from previous HNO cycles. So really here, the idea is to do a thorough secondary data review and to collect all of the relevant sources that you might use for the different parts of the analysis. I'm going to switch to the tool itself just to give you an idea of what it looks like. Here it is. So it's in the calculation tool. We put everything together just so you have it all in one place. But the grids, the list, the template itself is quite straightforward. You have a table, and I'll explain the first two columns, but where you list all of your data sources. So what's really important here is that when you're listing these data sources, that you're already doing a reflection of how you might use them. So to help you with this, we've put some categories here, drop-down lists, that are directly connected to the SSC framework. So for example, if you find a protection report that has been conducted in a specific district of your context, here you might list it as you write the content, you summarize the content of the report here, and then here you might say that it's referring to household vulnerability or community vulnerability, and here let me select. And here it's looking at gender issues, social cohesion, marginalized group, for example. So this is to help you already when you're listing the evidence to have them all organized in a way that you can refer back to them for your analysis. And we'll go back to this after. Here in this tab, you just have all of the list categories. So if for now, this is aligned to the SSC framework, but if you identify a specific category that is relevant to your context and that might not be here, you can of course add it. That's not a problem at all. Okay, go back to the presentation. So this is the first, let's say, platform or tool that you can use as a support to conduct these other parts of the analysis. The second one is the SSC analysis workshop. So what do we mean by analysis workshop? In practice, it might be an ad hoc meeting that you call with your regular cluster meetings that would include SAG members, shelter cluster partners that have technical analysis, programmatic, operational backgrounds, and in essence, all experts that can provide, an analyst that can provide context, interpretation, and have an understanding of the context and can link the SSC analysis to this understanding of the context. This is really important because, of course, you want to be able to contextualize the findings and have them embedded into a common understanding of what they mean for your context. So the concrete purpose of this workshop, an objective would be to, one, present your preliminary PIN and severity findings that you've calculated through the what we showed last week through the analysis grid, the decision tree, and so on, and then agree all together on any systematic adjustment that you would like to make. We'll go back to that because there's quite a process behind this. And the second objective is to address the other parts of the SSC analysis that I mentioned before. So an analysis of the other parts of the SSC framework, the vulnerability, the context, and the impact. The desired outcome of this analysis workshop is to have a consensus on the understanding of the shelter needs and conditions across the crisis. So if you go into the meeting and you're presenting the PIN and you have some objections to the results of the PIN that are based on a specific evidence, by the end of the meeting, you would want the whole group to agree to have a common agreement on the way forward on how to conduct these adjustments. And I will hand over to Hussein to discuss this issue of adjustment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Camilla, for this. So as mentioned by Camilla earlier, after we do the first round of analysis by using the calculation tool, we still have a room to reflect on the results that we have got as initial results on severity and the PIN figures. Most important here actually is to populate the evidence list as we go throughout the year. It's not like a one stop or one-off task or exercise. So throughout the year, whenever you come across a report, when you come across maybe some information, data sources, whatever, you just and you feel that they are relevant to your context, to the shelter situation, just populate it in the evidence list. So with that knowledge, with that understanding, with your expertise on the situation, you will be able to reflect on the initial or the preliminary results of the severity and PIN figures. We have developed some flagging system that can be adjusted. Currently, we have 4 flags highlighting where we have high PIN, which corresponds to more than 80% of the population in a specific admin area. When we have low PIN, corresponding to lower than 20% of the population in a specific area. As well, we have severity outliers, for instance, which means that one admin 2 or admin 3 within the admin 2 or the admin 1 is acting as an outlier compared to the other admin areas, and so on. These flags can be adjusted in the tool itself, and you can add more flags if you want to see more in-depth insights on the results. The purpose of the flags are to be used actually as indication where you do the in-depth analysis for which areas, because we know in some countries you might have been doing the analysis on admin 2 or admin 3 in which you will have maybe 100 or maybe 500 areas in your country, and it will be not feasible to go area by area and see the results and adjust the PIN or severity or do the in-depth analysis for all areas. So basically, this flagging system will act as of an initial indication where are the areas which might need like more attention to be considered for in-depth analysis. Manual flags can be added based on the information shared, based on the evidence list that we have collected, and so on. So whenever we have all of those flagged areas, we'll be able to, according to the evidence, we'll be able to reflect on the results. And if we see that the severity score that being generated is not correct or not accurate enough or does not represent the situation, we can adjust it either by increasing it or decreasing it according to what evidence do we have. Then the other thing on the when we can adjust the severity and the PIN, which will happen especially in countries where we have an interagency or intercluster working group, and other clusters are saying, I mean, something completely different from what we see. Like for instance, if we have in one area that the pin figure is like going like on 90% of the population, while all other clusters having the pin figure is more or less around 20% of the population. So we are acting as outlier as a cluster, and this will flag something for us, or trigger something to do more in-depth analysis to see why the shelter situation is acting as an outlier. The other way around, if we have our pin is much lower than the other clusters, or the severity at the same time. So I mean, this is something to trigger some discussions, to trigger some analysis that we can use further to adapt our initial results. Next slide, Camila, please. So we will go for a demo now. I will share my screen with the tool itself. So basically, as we have seen last week with Camila on the Excel tool, we have the tab with area level severity and pin analysis. In this sheet, it's an automated sheet based on the household level severity and the analysis grids that you have developed. And you will see that here you have the distribution of the population on the severity phases, and the pin figure is the sum of people or proportion of population who are living under severity 3, 4, and 5. So basically here, if I can see, I mean, under the flags here, we will have like the 4 flags that I have mentioned: high pin, low pin, distribution gap, and severity outlier. I will go on in order on them. So high pin, if I look at this area, for instance, if you see with me, the pin figure is actually more than like 80% of the population. So in that case, this area is flagged as a red flag here, and we will see. I mean, we'll need to see why in this area called Lasca node, for instance, here, why it is the case. So if I look at the distribution of the population, we have 25% in phase 3, 44% in phase 4, and 17 in phase 5. I mean, do we have any evidence that supports this finding? Do we have any evidence that maybe require or ask us to change to this finding, and so on? I mean, the total preliminary severity in this area is 4. Is it the reality or not? So we just need to reflect on this result and see how we can adapt it. The second one is on the low pin. If we look here, we have the areas here are all in severity 2. Low pin, we have less than 20% of the population in need, which means that we don't have major impact maybe in that area. But imagine if we have some reports, we have some evidence saying that active conflicts happening in those areas, and we still, I mean, our household level data showing us that very few people are in need. This means that there's something going wrong with the household level data, for instance, or maybe we didn't capture the reality, or maybe the assessment was being conducted before the clashes went off, or whatever. So for whatever reason, and this will trigger, I mean, as we said, the in-depth analysis, and to adjust the preliminary severity score and have the adjusted one. We will populate it here, and we'll say what evidence we have used to adjust that severity score from 2 to 4, for instance, or from 4 to 3, etc. So what evidence, and that evidence should be logged in the evidence list, as we have seen with Camila here. So it's important here to see all of these things, and we adjust the severity, we adjust the pin figure, and mention based on what, and thoroughly, please. It's important to describe what type of information, what type of analysis that you have used to inform this adjustment, and make sure that to keep your methodology sound, to keep your methodology coherent and consistent with to be based like on evidence. The other two flags here, we have the distribution gap. What do we mean by distribution gap? It means that if we look at the distribution of population on severity phases, it means that you will have less than 1%, for instance, in under any of the phases. One of those examples, for instance, like this one, we have like 0% here at phase 5. Is that a real situation, or maybe something going wrong? More interestingly, actually, like this case, for instance, if I look at this area, I have in severity 1, 2, 3, I have like figures. I mean, I don't know if you can see my screen very well. So if you see here, it's 4%, 41, 37, and then 0 under phase 4, and 19 under phase 5. Usually, I mean, this something is unusual. I mean, it's happening here because we are using dummy data, but if it happens in with real data, it triggers some questions there. Why we don't have population under phase 4? What's happening there? Why it's as a gap? It appears as a gap. So because usually, I mean, the situation is more or less follows normal distribution, and it should be covering the all phases. So just to trigger some analysis here and check why these things are happening. The severity outlier, it means that, like, for instance, I will take this admin 1 here. If you see admin 1, all areas under this admin 1 with severity 2. For example, if one of these areas acting as admin 5 and the rest are admin are severity 2, so the question here is why this specific area within the big province is acting as an outlier. What's happening there? It could be a pocket of need, it could be a besieged area, and then we just provide the evidence saying, well, we know that this is a besieged area and people are suffering there, and the shelter situation there is really bad and really catastrophic. That's why it's acting 5, while the rest of the area surrounding it, people having normal life. And this could be a normal situation. Maybe it's not correct, and we need to adjust this and make sure to have the correct evidence here. So basically, using this type of information that we collect under the evidence list, using the structure of the framework, that will allow us and will inform us actually to do our analysis here and adjust the severity score and the PIN figure that we will use as a final severity score and final PIN figure. This is one type of analysis that we can conduct here. The other type of analysis that we can conduct actually and make sure that it corresponds to the reality, when we look at the analysis by the 3 pillars. So we have developed this sheet as well, where we have the final results actually under each pillar. So we have the overall results, distribution of population under the on the 5 phases of severity, the initial like the PIN figure, and the initial severity score for the overall framework under the 3 pillars. But if I want to look at the shelter pillar itself, how the situation will look like. So we have the out of the shelter pillar from the household level severity here, from this pillar 1, we have done the same analysis when we do it on the overall, and we have generated the distribution of population over the severity phases, calculated the PIN figure, and have the initial or preliminary severity score. This applies for the 3 pillars, just to give you an indication on how the preliminary severity score was generated, based on what, and how it was informed or affected by what. We'll see now on the dashboards that we have developed how all of these things can be used in the analysis. So basically here with the dashboard, this is a Power BI template, and I'm using now the presentation here from the Power BI desktop, but you can publish it online and you can use it. But I'm just trying to show you here a few things. So under this dashboard, we have, some filters. We have the total population, people in need, the PIN percentage, and how many areas are generating that PIN. So how many areas are in severity 3, 4, and 5. Basically, here you see the same flags. The PIN flag here, if the PIN is high or low. For instance, here we have a low PIN. Other areas have high PIN. Under the severity phases, we see the distribution of population by severity phases, but we see the flag. Whenever you have the row is highlighted by red, it means that there one phase is showing 0 or 1, but these thresholds can be adjusted according to what you feel representing your context. So basically, this is an initial view on how the results can be presented. As well, we have developed simple maps here. You can adjust, according to your context, according to what you really want to represent, but we showed in side to side the PIN and the severity maps in the countries that we are using as an example here. Then we have the analysis of severity by pillar, which is here is a little bit of interesting things that we can do. So I will just take away this. Well, it is a very condensed chart here, and we cannot read it like that. But what is the purpose actually of this, or what are the information showed in this chart? So we have all admin tools, the unit of analysis. They are the dimensions of this pillar. Then we will see the we have 3 or 4 actually. We have the pillar 1 severity, pillar 2 severity, and pillar 3 severity, and the overall severity. Now the overall severity is covered by pillar 1 severity because they are corresponding to each other. So what to do as an analysis here? So for example, if I can go for one severity score, if I want to see the crisis category, and I will see what areas having crisis category. So I have these areas under crisis category, and I see, for instance, that in this area here, down to the right, severity pillar 3 has severity 2, pillar 2 has severity 3, and pillar 1 has severity 4. So I can see here that the shelter situation in this area and in this area are worse as shelter situation than in the other areas under the pillar 1. So I know that in Jalib here is the situation is more driven by the shelter situation rather than in this area here, where the shelter situation is severity, or under the pillar 1 is severity 2. So this will allow us to understand visually how areas under the same severity classification are generated, are affected by the crisis under the 3 pillars, and which is the main driver of that severity classifications that we have got for this area. For example, if I want to look at it geographically, I will select, for instance, a couple of admin ones. So here, if I select one admin one, I will see 4 areas in this admin one, and I will see that, for instance, in this area here to the right, that this severity, like here, and on the top for pillar 1 is higher than the other 2 areas. So I know that in these 2 areas, more affected by shelter situation. The rest, for pillar 2 and pillar 3, we have similar severity score for the 2 pillars. It means that they have, or they show similar, situation or similar impact of the crisis on those areas under pillar 2 and pillar 3. While under pillar 1, these 2 areas, top and right, having more severe situation and really needs more attention from our side. This type of chart will allow us to see the outliers as well. Whenever we have an outlier, it will you will see it under one of the pillars. You will see the outlier going out, while the others are really showing low severity, or the other way around. It will be going down if it is lower severity than the other areas. So this is an important, actually, tool here that we are providing to be used maybe during the analysis workshop to show visually how the severity is managed, not only to read the numbers, but just to show it visually and to show the how it was driven and generated for each of the admin ones, for instance, or for each of the severity classification. Under stress, you have one area, like for instance, if I take the 4, I mean, under the 4, they are all even. They are showing the same impact of all of the pillars. But this is a dummy data. I mean, we cannot, I mean, like generate more like distributed data on using random data here. But in the real situation, you will see like different areas showing different impact of the crisis under each pillar for sure. Then we have the priority analysis. If we look at the priority here, how we are ranking, I mean, just we have sorted the areas under different or multiple ranking. I will show you one specific case here actually. So the ranking here is based on the severity score, pillar 1, pillar 2, pillar 3, and then the percentage of the pin percentage. So for instance, if you look at this area, middle Juba here, it is the severity score is 3. The other one, I mean, between Jilib and Buola, we have the both severity 3. Then we have in Zilak, we have severity 3 as well. But look, here we have 432 and 432, which is fine. Then we have 332. Okay, if you look only at the final severity score, you will see them equal. Why they are not really equal? Because the shelter situation in Middle Juba, in the two areas of Middle Juba, is worse than the shelter situation under the pillar 1 in Zilak, for instance. So this is an important as well to see it from this perspective, to see even within areas that they share the same severity score, they might be differences. And this is important as well to notice while you do your analysis, while you do your prioritization or planning afterwards. The final thing that I want to show here, actually, it's an addition to the framework. It's not included in the framework as such, but we're trying to introduce this idea, and it will link to the prioritization. I mean, you will see the this sheet actually is more or less similar to this one. There's nothing different, except that we have one extra column called situation index. What do we mean by situation index? The situation index is just like another measure that we can generate. It's a measure that you can generate based on some information. In this case, what information we have used to generate this measure, actually, if you look here, so the shelter situation index, I just use a dummy formula here to generate that index. I use the severity score, area severity score, multiplied by the pin percentage, multiplied as well by 2 if the population group is IDPs, and by 1 if the population group is host community. Just a dummy formula that I have used to generate this code. Now it doesn't mean anything. I'm just saying that I will prioritize IDPs over host community whenever the situation of the IDPs will be kind of worse or more affected by the crisis. Why you can add actually to generate this shelter or the situation index. If I go back to the Excel sheet, any of these information that you see here corresponding to the framework, where you have data, you have information, for instance, like population groups. If you look at the household vulnerability, if you have the percentage of household female-headed household in that community, for instance, if you have the percentage of the IDPs over the total population, if it's high IDPs in the area versus low IDP in the area, if it is an area with like more, I would say, affected by active conflict versus protracted crisis, and the conflict is released or not active in that area. So all of that information you can use to generate the situation index, and how that situation index will inform us further. We can use it for prioritization, we can use it for planning, and make sure that we are using correct, context and vulnerabilities information. Important here to notice that we cannot standardize this index as a part of the SSC. SSC is needs analysis, while the index will inform you to prioritize, to target populations or to target areas beyond the needs if you would like to engage or integrate more indicators or more variables in your targeting process or in your targeting criteria. This is important, especially when you have a context with less resources and you need to mobilize your resources or be more wise on how you target the population in need, because you cannot cover everyone, and where to start, with whom to start, and so on. So this is will allow you to use as a basis the results of the shelter severity classification system, plus in addition to other factors or variables that you have data and you have evidence around, to generate this index that will inform this situation. So basically, this is something that we have developed as like an initial template for analysis, for sure. And I'm sure that we have great IMOs in the countries that can develop further this analysis. The template will be shared online as well, so you can use it as a starting point with the Excel and the Power BI and move forward with that. You can add more maps, you can add more analysis, more charts as you feel it's useful for your country and for your context, especially if you have more elements that you would like to analyze around. If you have more data sets that you will integrate in your analysis, if you would like to showcase in different ways for different audience. So this template can be used as a baseline, and you can for sure amend it, increase, add more elements to this analysis. But we would love to see more ideas coming from the field to be integrated in the template as well as we go on with the implementation. I will stop here now, and I will hand over back to Camila to continue on the outputs of the shelter severity classification, and then we will open the floor for more discussions.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, just a final word to say, any adjustment that you make has to be based on evidence. So make sure that you're tracking really your rationale, your thinking, so that if at some point anyone asks or you want to retrace the analysis, you're able to say, this is the justification we used to be able to make this adjustment. Okay, just a very quick words on this part of the analysis. So where you're essentially addressing the other parts of the SSC framework. So as we explained last week, the PIN and the severity and the PIN are based on these red boxes here. So an understanding of the shelter needs and conditions based on the 3 pillars: the shelter itself, the living conditions inside the shelter, and the access to services and infrastructure in the settlement conditions. All the rest is what allows you to provide context and embed your severity and PIN results into a broader understanding of the humanitarian context. So this includes looking at vulnerabilities and capacities at household level, community level, the context, so some macro level factors that you can get from sources, I don't know, from government sources, the World Bank, UNDP, or other development sources. Then you have the description of the event itself, what is causing the humanitarian crisis, and also what other non-shelter needs, how these might also be influencing the shelter needs. So all of this is at the moment, the way it's included into the SSC model is that it's qualitative analysis. So it's providing narrative understanding to your quantitative PIN and severity calculation. At the top here, you also have the analysis on the possible impacts of unmet shelter conditions. So what is the effect on public health, mortality, the environment, safety, and so on, that may be caused by shelter needs and conditions. So the idea is for you to really embed your analysis of shelter needs and conditions into the broader humanitarian and understanding the humanitarian context. Whenever possible, and if you're doing this in during an HNO, this is all analysis that will be done through the GF process. So you can, of course, relate to it for your own analysis. The final output of all of this is the shelter needs overview, which is a comprehensive standalone analysis that is summarized in a variety of products. One of them is the dashboard that we just showed you. We've also developed a standard InDesign template for a report with different sections and shelter cluster branding and so on. And this output can then be used for a variety of purposes. You can use it for advocacy purposes, to advocate for funding. You can use it to inform the shelter cluster strategy, to inform the GF process, HNO, HRP, but also flash appeals or any other interagency process. The template itself, just very quickly, so we have in the content, and you can adapt it as you want, but the idea is to provide the key advocacy messages based on your analysis of the shelter needs and conditions, then a description of the crisis itself, the scope of the analysis. So I see that in the chat we've been discussing on the baseline population, for example. So this is one of the things that would be included in this part of the shelter needs overview. Then your description, your retracing of the PIN and severity, and risk analysis. So that's the part of the framework that discusses impact. So what is the risk? What might be the risks if shelter needs are not met? And then the final part is where you discuss how you're going to track these needs. So this is then what links to response monitoring. Okay, that's all that we wanted to present to you today. And we'll open the floor now for any question on either what was discussed last week or this week. Over to you.
Thank you, Camila, for this. Over to you, colleagues. If there are any questions, please raise your hands and unmute yourself. Padmore, then Renee. Padmore, please come in.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you very much for the beautiful presentation. I was wondering about the three pillars. I'm sorry if this question may be coming late, but the third pillar, seeing that we might not have data at the moment because we are not prepared for it, how do we solve the issue of non-existence of data, especially for the third pillar, or do we have to rely on other clusters to provide for us the data that we are going to use for the analysis? Thank you.
Camila, would like to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So indeed the third pillar covers your access to services and infrastructure, which usually will be things like access to education, access to employment opportunities, health centers, markets, water infrastructure, sanitation, and so on. So by definition, all of these services are going to be covered by the other clusters. So what you should do is, let me phrase that the other way around. Usually, the other clusters should have gone through the process of identifying what are the relevant services and infrastructure questions that they should be asking in their context. So the ones that they are including in the MSNA, for example, are usually the ones that are relevant to the context. So what you should do is have a look at the other sections of the questionnaire that have been developed by other clusters and identify those ones that you want to include. So again, usually it's going to be the basic ones like the access to water, access to sanitation. Those two ideally should be there. But then you can also add access to education, which is almost always in MSNAs, access to health centers. You can also choose to add access to livelihoods. So it's also up to you as the clustering country to identify which services and infrastructure is would be particularly relevant in your context.
Thank you, Camila. I hope this answered your question, Padmore. Over to you, Renee.
Yes, it was to expand a little bit about my questions that I put in the chat, because when you're talking about people in need, especially for an urban context such as the one I'm working in, where we don't really have camps, and then countries where censuses obviously haven't been done. I think here the last one we had was 2005, and even that was an estimate. So what we worked actually with OCHA quite a lot last year, and we used the land scan data in the satellite imagery, but as a recent publication of the IDP figures put a lot of that into question. I think it's, and because in our strategy we're targeting 3 types of populations, almost 4. IDPs, returnees, non-displaced. So to do the methodology, you'll need to have a statistically significant sample, but you'll need a baseline population for each of those locations, which is somewhat reliable in order to get that population. And what we found, also working with OCHA this year, is that the household assessments that we have from cluster partners are usually very biased to IDPs, because our cluster tool that we're using, it has many partners contributing to it because nobody has dedicated funds for it. But actually the partners have done an amazing job of doing the data collection and keeping everything aligned. But of course, they're looking for vulnerable people in a kind of snowball sampling way, not a random sampling way. So obviously that's going to impact the ability to come up with reliable people in need figures. So what is your recommendation for urban environments such as ours, where that might influence the way that you get population figures? Because if you apply the percentages of IDPs, for example, to a population that Landscan has estimated, you will overestimate the number of IDPs to be in the billions, which does not match the human reading. So it's a major challenge to come up with people in need on household data alone, especially when the figures are somewhat unreliable, and you need to get statistically significant results under the at least 3 population categories. So yes, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that, because it's something that actually we're seeing as an issue for us in this upcoming H&O, even if we use our own methodology as Northwest Southwest.
Well, yeah, thanks, Rene, for raising this. Actually, yeah, I mean, indeed, I mean, it's a challenge to have the accurate data there. Like in such situation, if you don't have the census, the national census for a long time, and then you will go under estimates. I think the safe, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, maybe other colleagues and even from the field colleagues, if you have other reflections, please come in after. My approach would be to go on the agreed upon population figures. I mean, as we agree as a humanitarian community to work with. I mean, in the end, we are there to implement a humanitarian response. So as we agree as collective humanitarian community to use whatever population figures as a most reliable ones to be used. I mean, I cannot go as outside of that community saying I will use this data set because I believe it's more reliable and the other, especially if there are kind of uncertainty about the quality of those data sets or the recency of the data sets and so on. So it's important here to have the consensus with the humanitarian community, and I think this exercise of population figures is almost done like every year with OCHA, especially in HPC countries. It's important to follow that. I mean, if we have actually a good justification and a good source on population figures with good methodology and so on, it will be important to present it as well to the intercluster community or to the humanitarian community in the country and make sure that it's included in the population estimation as in when at the beginning or the kickoff of the HPC cycle when the exercises of population figures and the baselines are conducted. So I'm sorry that I don't have a straightforward answer or an accurate answer that can be like you can use this data set or that data set. It's just that we really need to be flowing with the current of the humanitarian community in the country and what is agreed upon data sets. I mean, I would love as well to hear some insights on this from other colleagues, if any of the colleagues, face similar issue in their countries, and they, on the ways they have resolved it as well. I don't see anyone coming in on that. I don't know, Rahul, if you would like to add on this or you have a question.
Thank you, Hussein, and thank you everyone at GLC for building the framework and the presentations. I have a couple of queries. I don't have anything to come back on the point was discussed. The
Sure.
first query is there any specific guidance on the distributions for each severity? For an example, our PIN should consider severity 3, 4, and 5. So is there any guidance on what percentage of population for severity 3, for an example, 40% or 60% or any guidance on that? And second question is, as noted earlier, shelter NFI, sorry, the Holo Syria operation, we have a separate pin for shelter and NFI. For shelter, they are the 4 indicators from pillar 1 and 1 indicator from pillar 2 and 1 indicator from pillar 3 will be considered as pin. So how do we distribute the scoring across these pillars? Yeah, over from my side.
Yep. So on the first one, actually, we are using the 20% rule, Camila.
Yes. So in the cases where you have access to, you have household level analysis and data, you're summing 3, 4, and 5. So you're not picking a set percentage of the population to determine your PIN. It's going to be the percentage that is has been estimated of the population that is under 3, 4, and 5. So if, for example, after you do your whole analysis, in one area you have 10% under pillar 3, 5 under pillar 4, and 1 under pillar 5, 16, then your PIN is going to be 16% of the baseline population. In the cases where you don't have access to household level data, so those might be, any context, either there's no MSNA or there is no household level data that has been conducted, but you have area level results. So you know that this area is in severity 3, 4, this one 2. So here what you can do is apply the 20% rule, which means that in areas of severity 1, you're going to say that less then 20% of the population is in the PIN. Areas of severity 2, less than 40%. Severity 3, 60, 80, and so on. But that's where indeed there needs to be a bit of then discussion on, okay, we apply this 20% rule, does it make sense in the context? So in those cases, you may need to find other sources of data to justify the final results. But the important thing is to always base your PIN on the severity and to not disconnect the two processes. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thanks, Camilla. Yeah, on this, I mean, we will discuss a couple of scenarios in the coordination workshop on how to do when we don't have household level data, and we'll see how the SSC with the current structure can be implemented and generate reasonable and accurate results as we wanted it to generate. So on the second question, when you have the one indicator from pillar 2, one indicator from pillar 3, and the 4 indicators of pillar 1, and how would you generate the severity? Actually, I would run the exercise in that sense, actually, in the same way. I will run it for shelter, considering one indicator under pillar 2, considering one indicator under pillar 3, and generate the severity of that indicator under pillar 2, generate the severity of that indicator under pillar 3. So I will have the severity of the 3 pillars, plus the severity, with the overall severity, and we'll have the distribution of the population over severity scores, and so on. So this is how I will do it. I will just adapt the tool itself to work in that way. I mean, now as you see, you have seen we in the tool we have generated the analysis per pillar. So it means that we have kind of looked at the specific pillar and considered those indicators. You don't need to have a new invention here to add one the same indicator under pillar 1 and see how it will affect the severity, especially if you see it under pillar 2. So you just use the same principle. Consider pillar 2 is measured by only that indicator that you will see it, pillar 3 by that one indicator, and then the output of that process will generate the shelter PIN. Another process will generate the NFI PIN and or shelter severity and NFI severity, and so on. So we'll just adapt how you implement the tool here to separate the shelter and the PIN situation. And I think as well, this is one of the scenarios that we will discuss next week, and we'll see what could be, you know, a good way to implement SSC in such scenario, and what would be the insights from field colleagues who have the similar situation in their context.
There's a follow-up question on if the guidance on the 20% rule, the 2040 and so on, is in line with GF 2.0.
Okay.
Hussein, yeah.
On the GF 2.0, actually now the PIN and the severity under GF, they are not related. And the reason why is that we don't have a methodology or a theory on how to distribute population per severity at intersectoral level. As we said last week, we use sphere standards. The humanitarian needs are defined by sector, and that's how we are able to see the severity of the needs and how we distribute the population over the severity for each sector, for shelter, for wash, for education, and so on. But we don't have a theory where what constitutes the severity of the humanitarian need at the intersectoral level. We don't have that as agreed upon at the system level, like at the global system level. So that's why we have this delinking of severity and PIN at the at GF2. For the PIN figure, actually, if I may use this here, actually, it is a max PIN at the end, but it's named as a mosaic PIN or overall PIN, and is generated as who is the max PIN from which cluster. So we use all the clusters PIN for one area, for one population group, and we go down, even if we have the disaggregation by age and gender, we are going down to that group, and we see who is producing the max pin for that specific group. Like for women IDPs under admin 3 to 1. So these 5 elements. So who is the cluster that generating the max pin for this group? And we are summing all of those max pins together to generate the overall pin. And we're not calling it an intersectoral pin. We're not calling it a max pin. I mean, just for the sensitivity of the word max pin, because it was kind of a sensitive issue, especially with donors previously. That's why we are having now what's so-called mosaic methodology to generate the overall PN at the intersectoral level for GF 2.0. Again, I can share the recordings. Today we received the recordings of the GF briefing that happened, webinars that happened last week, just on Wednesday, one day after our first webinar. If you have missed that webinar, we can share the link to the recordings if you would like. During the session, I'll just put it in the chat. I hope I answered this question as well. If there's anything, please come forward, Rahul, again. But over to you, Renee.
Yes, so my second question, it's about the issue that you were mentioning about the different indicators to choose within each pillar, and about the need to that obviously if you in the first indicator, if you already hit 5, you may not have the totality of understanding of the needs. One worry that my team and I were discussing last week after the session was a little bit about one thing that we have in our severity methodology is always if a house is at total collapse, what's the cause for its total collapse? Because a lot of humanitarian shelter donors won't it's not that they won't allow you, but they would consider expenses ineligible if you're going to intervene on houses that were damaged by natural disaster or a lack of maintenance. So the cause of the total collapse, as they were talking about last week in the GF, might be ignored if you don't have the totality of understanding. The same for us about the tenure security. I'm a little bit worried that tenure security is at the end of pillar 1, because then we don't actually get to understand some of the tenure issues that impact our crisis a lot. And obviously we want to keep working together with HLPAOR on some of these issues. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, because, and then also in the math, I think the pillar 2, you can't reach severity 5 in pillar 2, which might be somewhat concerning for some context. So that's also something that's a bit unfair. And then I feel like pillar 3, we have quite a lot of indicators in our pillar 3, but yeah, how that all gets represented, especially when working with other sectors like health and health education. And then for our cluster, when we did the CCPM in January, we ranked very low on some of that settlement planning, cross-cutting urban planning issues in our context. So we really want to bring that out. So I'd like to hear more about what the plan is for better the comprehensiveness of the approach, and how we don't neglect maybe some of these indicators that are actually very important to understand the holistic shelter needs.
Thank you. Thank you, Renee. Actually, I mean, on the first question on how we don't miss the, like the situation or the driver of the situation. It's in the answer here is straightforward for me, because we have all of the indicators with all of the criteria, right? Like if you see on the screen now, I mean, I might hit 5 here because the situation of the shelter is unsafe and life-threatening, right? And then I will miss all of the other elements. I don't know if this 5 was generated by this only, or maybe by the sum of all the others, right? It could be one or the second. So the thing here is that I do my analysis down to this level if I need it. Like what we have shown in the on the dashboard, we have this sheet for admin tools like by pillar, right? But maybe you can add one more sheet. I mean, it's something for us as well to consider, and thank you for bringing it up. Add maybe 3 more sheets to see each pillar, how the severity of that pillar was generated according to the criteria for each pillar, and what was the driver for that severity, right? I mean, this can be added, and we will consider to add it actually, I mean, hopefully from now to next week, so we can show that as well next week in the coordination workshop to show how it acts in practice. And this, I mean, applies as well to pillar 2 and pillar 3, and see how other things, I mean, are kind of derived by which criteria or by which element that we are looking at in our analysis. So we look at the criteria, because under each shelter situation, we have the 3 criteria: safe, unsafe with issues, or unsafe, life-threatening, and so on. That will bring us towards that. So the security of tenure will appear here, and we'll see the score of the security of tenure for each indicator. So we can have the indicators as drivers for, or as pillars here under the dimensions, and see, I mean, the score of each of the indicator under 4 areas. So this is something to look at as well for the analysis. I mean, the data is there, and you can look at it, and you can highlight in your analysis where areas are, like, I mean, similar to what we are saying in the priority analysis. If you would like, you can expand to each indicator level, and you rank the areas based on that. So if you have the 5 of pillar 1 is generated by a 5, that the house is total collapse, is different from when it's a 5 because it's generated because of some of other issues, right? So this is something to be considered to go in depth of analysis, but we try to keep it as high level here, and leave the room for each context, for each cluster to expand with the analysis as they want. But this is something really to be considered, and it's a great idea to have it actually in our analysis, and we will consider it for sure. Thank you for this. This is on the donors issue and the totality of the collapse. On the math for the 3 pillars, yes, as you can see, pillar 2 and pillar 3, they can reach up to 4. If you look at the decision tree, yes, the top of decision tree, we have 5, 4, 4. So whatever, I mean, even the situation of the NFI is coming as worse as, like, it can be, it cannot be compared to the 5 of the shelter. I mean, this is kind of, you know, from the simple understanding of the population or the people of their needs. If you don't have a house, I mean, nothing, I mean, none of the NFIs can replace your house, or none of the access to services can replace your house. Same for, you know, like the replacement. If you need to measure the severity of having, you know, not having a house, I mean, this is more affecting the population than not having NFIs or not having access to services. This was the concept actually that we have followed when we generated, or we assigned scores for each pillar. Under for winterization, actually, when it comes to winterization, it is on under the thermal comfort of the shelter, and it's considered under pillar 1. But NFIs, I mean, you will see that situation if we look at sorry, I mean, I'll go back to the analysis grid. So we have 1 indicators: adaptability to the climate and the thermal comfort. So under pillar 1, so it's covered under pillar 1, but the response to the winterization, I mean, the driver for winterization to provide winterization response is that I mean, the shelters really need more, like, thermal comfort and so on, and then you provide whatever you can provide to adapt or to respond to that need. That's why it's under the pillar 1 rather than under pillar 2. Yes, Rene, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in there because, I mean, yes, the issue, so I would see it differently. I mean, I know this is not, it's not, I'm not speaking from Cameroon now, but I'm speaking from, but one can have, you know, a house that's designed for thermal comfort, fairly small, but if one doesn't have, you know, if it's a house that normally uses coal or wood, or, you know, in some context, and it doesn't have the ability to heat their house because of not having those items, I would see it as a 5 in those contexts. So that would be more my logic, because the thermal comfort, the shelter intervention can, the way it's designed, it can be designed to enhance those things. But if the mechanism for heating the house isn't working, or also the communal infrastructure is interrupted for some reason, which is beyond the ability of any shelter actor to do anything to the house, because it's an infrastructure issue, right, on the level of the community. Those things are not in place, then yeah, it's not
Yep.
only about the shelter, right? It's about the ability to get a temporary supplement either through NFIs or through getting a community infrastructure implementation fix to sustainably resolve those things, which might be more a development issue. But that was more my thinking about
Yeah,
that. So maybe we
definitely.
need to.
Definitely, I mean, the needs here, I mean, the needs are different from the way we respond to them. So the needs is to have the thermal comfort, for instance, or the adaptability to the climate. This is the need. And I mean, it affects the population, but it's coming from different reasons, right? I mean, it doesn't come from the absence of thick clothes or absence of the standard of NFI kit. The need itself, it's can I feel warm at my home? This is the need. Now, how we respond to that need, maybe we build better shelters, we provide electricity for heating, we provide maybe coal, or maybe we provide thermal blankets. So it depends. So here, when it comes to the term winterization, it looks at the response itself to specific need, which is people don't feel warm during winter. How we respond to that? I mean, in some cases, and we are providing NFIs. In other cases, we are providing fuel. In other cases, we are building or maybe providing better tarpaulins to have thermal comfort. I don't know. I mean, so just not to mix the needs versus the modality of the response and how we respond to those needs. Tamira?
Yeah, I wanted to add a point also on another question that Renee, you had on the cause of the collapse. So I think this is also something that maybe goes back to the question between what is the need and then how do you prioritize. The approach here would be to consider whatever the reason for the collapse of the house, the result is the outcome is the household has no more shelter, whatever the reason. And so in that case, the household is in need of shelter. But then, understandably, in some contexts, you may have some different rules in terms of how you can frame your response and so on. So that's when the distinction could then happen when you're working on your targets and prioritization. So for example, if there is a specific area where you find that shelters have been destroyed because of, I don't know, I'm saying something very random, but because of a flood, but the response is only tailored to conflict, then in that case, for your targeting, you can decide to not include those people. But in terms of the PIN, they're still in need of shelter. And that's really the distinction that's important to emphasize on this tool, is that for now it covers the calculation of the people in need of shelter. And then how you prioritize, that's the next step.
See, okay, Camilla, Renee, again, please.
Yeah, sorry. I don't mean to talk all the time, but if nobody else will say anything,
Yeah, for sure.
just
No,
to respond to
it's
that,
a
Camila.
discussion, please.
Yes, yes. I'm sorry, everybody. Please come ahead. I don't feel bad that I'm trying to take all the time. Anyway, just in response to that, I think oftentimes we have to remember humanitarian caseload here is important. I think there's a lot of context where you know, yes, people need shelter, but those issues are created because of government lack of policies and things. So yes, they have a shelter need, but can we always include them amongst our caseload, even if they're in conflicted affected areas? And I think I've seen in many different countries different types of ways of addressing that. So I think it is an important consideration, especially for when we're talking about our more protracted conflicts where a lot of these issues run side by side. So I think on that particular issue, just to respond to Camila's point, that I think it is something to be aware of, because then we might, you know, overstate the actual humanitarian caseload, and we are activated for humanitarian situations. So yes, that was just, I think we do need to be a bit careful how we approach it, especially for those more protracted conflict situations.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rene, for this. Any other comments, colleagues? Questions? So we still have kind of more 5 minutes or 6 minutes before we close the session. So if there's are no more questions, let me just give a little bit of brief on what will happen next week during the coordination workshop. So for colleagues who are joining us in Geneva for the coordination workshop, we will have a discussion around the 3 scenarios, and we will reach out to the colleagues who are coming from countries having those scenarios, based mostly on the questions that have been asked throughout the 3 sessions that we had so far, the lunch webinar and last week and this week. We have kind of identified 3 interesting scenarios to be discussed. We'll reach out to those colleagues to explain, I mean, they will be explaining their scenario and the situation in the country, and we will see together with a group of the participants how the SSC can be implemented to address or to provide a shelter needs analysis for that scenario. We will reach out to you in the next couple of days. We will have calls, and we will present the scenarios in the coordination workshop as discussed, and the session mostly will be recorded, and we will provide put the recording on the website as needed. And as always, for other colleagues to benefit from the discussions that we will have, because I mean, I don't think that we have everyone in this call joining us next week in Geneva. With this, I just would like to thank everyone. Thank you, Camila, and thank you, Neil, for the presentations, and thanks, colleagues, for the questions. Thanks, Rene, for the rich discussion. It triggers a lot of thoughts and ideas, and really looking forward to have more discussions around this with you on how we can push forward or move forward this analysis further, and see how it will work in real practice. With this, I don't know, Camila, Neil, if you would like to add anything at the end of the session before we close it.
Yes, there is one last question in the chat. Yeah, from Ali. If data is not available in a specific location, what is your recommendation? So I would say this is going to have to be a case-by-case approach, in the sense that there might be situations where data is not accessible. There's no data because that area is too dangerous to collect the information, or it might be that you don't have any data collection at all in certain areas because of resources. So in that case, the first step is to use your evidence list, where you've logged all of the different sources of information that is available, and from there see, okay, how can we, as you say, extrapolate information from that to be able to conduct our analysis. In some cases, you can use things like remote sensing analysis. You could use key informant information if you have it. So it would really have to be done on a case-by-case study. In some cases as well, you could also look at the situation in the areas around this and see if it's applicable. But that's where the evidence list and the analysis workshops become really important, because you don't have such a solid evidence. You really need to bring all of these extra pieces of information together to get a
yeah, sure. Thanks, Camila. Yeah, for sure. And definitely, this is one of the analyses that we will, or scenarios we will consider next week. Could you share the data set using the randomization? Yeah, we will put this Excel sheet, you know, like, I mean, we just shared our random data set. The template is already on the website, but we will update it because we had few updates on the template. We will update it, and everything will be on the website under the shelter severity classification page. As I promised, actually, I need to maybe share the links of the GF recording before I forget that. And this is important if you would like to listen to it. Actually, there are English, French, and Spanish. I will just put them in order. So let me just put that in the chat. And this is first one English, this is French, and this is Spanish. It has the auto translation. So these are the recording of the GF webinar. If you would like to have more insights on how GF2 was designed and how to maybe approach it when it comes to your implementation in your countries. With that, I think we are approaching the time here. It's 3:30. Thank you, everyone. We will publish the recording of this session on the website by tomorrow. You can share it again with other colleagues if you would like, or you refer back to this recording. Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon, or maybe good rest of your day. Good morning. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Hussein. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.